The sea has always been a place of mystery, danger, and unpredictability. But during World War II, it became a stage for some of the most intense and tragic stories of human conflict. Among these stories is one that seems almost too cruel to be true. A tale where the chaos of war, the precision of military strategy, and the bonds of family collided in a devastating way. Imagine a captain in a U-boat, navigating through the dark, stormy waters of the Atlantic. His mind focused on the mission, the survival of his crew, and the invisible enemy lurking somewhere beneath the waves. Every decision he made carried the weight of life and death, not just for the men under his command but for countless others who had no idea what fate awaited them. In the chaos of naval warfare, blackouts were standard procedure, creating a world where sight and certainty were limited, where the night swallowed ships whole, and where the ocean itself became a dangerous labyrinth. Visibility was near zero, the horizon indistinguishable from the sky, and every shadow could be an enemy submarine or a ship carrying innocents. Captains and their crews relied heavily on intelligence, radio signals, and code names to identify friend from foe. But even the most carefully guarded plans were vulnerable to error. In these circumstances, a single mistake, a misread signal, or a miscalculated maneuver could have catastrophic consequences. For one U-boat captain, these dark waters became more than just a theater of war. They became the backdrop for a personal tragedy that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. On a mission meant to disrupt enemy supply lines, the captain found himself in the position of executing orders with ruthless precision, following protocols drilled into him from months of training and the relentless demands of military hierarchy. But amid the coded messages and the tension of patrol, fate intervened in the most unimaginable way. One of the ships he targeted, believed to be an enemy vessel, was in fact carrying his own brother. The realization of what had happened is almost impossible to convey. In the military, there is an understanding that casualties are a part of the war machine, that human lives are a tragic but inevitable cost in the pursuit of strategic goals. Yet no training, no amount of conditioning, could prepare someone for the horror of discovering that those lost lives were not faceless enemies, but family. The captain's actions were technically in line with his orders, executed with the same professionalism and precision demanded of every soldier in the field. Still, the emotional weight of that single event would overshadow every other success and failure in his career. This story also underscores a broader truth about the nature of war. In the heat of battle, lines blur, identities are hidden beneath layers of code and protocol, and even those closest to us can become strangers in the fog of conflict. The blackouts that masked movements on the ocean, the encrypted signals that guided attacks, and the strict separation of knowledge between units were all designed to give a tactical advantage. But they also made the unthinkable possible. A brother could sail into danger without either party realizing it, and by the time the truth emerged, it was too late to turn back the tide of fate. The tragedy is compounded when we consider the scale of war itself. Thousands of vessels crisscrossed the Atlantic, each carrying men, supplies, and stories. Every captain faced the same impossible decisions under the same high stakes. Yet amid the statistics, amid the numbers that historians recite to quantify losses, the personal human cost can be easy to overlook. In this case, the personal became historical, and history became painfully intimate. The sea did not discriminate. It took the lives of the young and the experienced, of soldiers and civilians, of friends and, tragically, family. And yet, the story of this U-boat captain is not just one of sorrow. It's a lens through which we can understand the moral and emotional complexities of war. A reminder that behind every strategic move is a human being forced to weigh duty against conscience, orders against instinct. The ocean, with its black waves and silent depths, becomes not just a battlefield but a mirror reflecting the paradoxes of conflict. The honor of service entangled with the heartbreak of unintended consequences. In the end, the dark waters of the Atlantic were not just a place of battle but a stage where the cruel twists of fate played out with unforgiving precision, leaving a man to carry the unimaginable burden of a brother lost to the very war he had sworn to fight. In the world of U-boat operations during World War II, secrecy wasn't just a precaution. It was the very backbone of survival. Every mission, every maneuver, every decision was guided by a network of codes, signals, and carefully orchestrated plans that could mean the difference between life and death. For a submarine captain, the ocean was not only a battlefield but a puzzle of constantly shifting pieces, where one wrong interpretation of a message could have catastrophic consequences. Unlike surface ships, U-boats operated in isolation, often for weeks at a time, submerged beneath waves that concealed both threats and opportunities. Communication with command was limited, sometimes delayed, and always encrypted, creating an environment where confusion could easily take hold. Code names, ciphers, and radio signals became more than just military jargon. They became the language of survival. Every vessel, every convoy, every target had a designation that masked its true identity, designed to protect missions from enemy interception. Yet, the very system that was meant to safeguard the lives of crews could also obscure the most critical truths. A single letter in a code, a misheard number, or a slight misalignment of coordinates could transform a friendly vessel into a deadly target. For those underwater, in the dark confines of a U-boat, there was no room for doubt. Every crew member trusted the captain's judgment completely, believing that orders were precise and intelligence accurate. But in the fog of war, precision was a fragile illusion. For our captain, navigating this web of secrecy and confusion became a daily struggle. Each mission required him to interpret coded instructions, identify enemy movements, and anticipate threats that could appear from any direction. The Atlantic was a labyrinth, and the U-boat, while stealthy, was also vulnerable. Detection by sonar, air patrols, or even the slightest mistake could spell disaster. The crew depended on the captain not only for tactical decisions but for the moral certainty that, despite the chaos around them, they were acting correctly. But even the most meticulous preparation could not account for the unpredictability of human error, or the cruel twists of fate that sometimes turned a mission into a personal nightmare. One of the most insidious challenges was the reliance on intelligence that was, by necessity, incomplete. Command could only provide so much information about enemy convoys or friendly movements, and often, data was outdated by the time it reached a U-boat in the middle of the ocean. Mistaken identity was not uncommon, and captains were forced to make life or death decisions with imperfect knowledge. It was in these moments that the machinery of war collided with human judgment, creating situations that no manual could fully prepare someone to handle. For our captain, this collision became heartbreakingly real when a misinterpreted code led him to attack a ship he believed to be an enemy, only to discover too late that it carried his own brother. This environment of confusion was not the exception. It was the rule. Every U-boat patrol carried a sense of tension so intense that it could almost be felt in the air of the submarine itself. Crews lived in constant anticipation of orders, scanning the horizon for movement, listening for the faintest hint of danger. Decisions had to be made instantly, often without time to consult maps or verify information. In such a high-pressure setting, the difference between success and disaster often came down to intuition as much as intelligence. And yet intuition was fallible. Even seasoned captains could be misled by a signal that seemed clear, a code that appeared unambiguous, or the deceptive calm of the open ocean. The story of this U-boat captain is a vivid reminder of the human cost hidden behind the faceless mechanics of war. While historians often focus on strategy, numbers, and outcomes, the truth of life aboard these submarines was far more intimate and precarious. Each decision carried not just tactical implications but moral and emotional weight. Every misread code or misunderstood signal could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways that no one could predict. For the captain, the reliance on these codes and the very structure of wartime secrecy made the tragedy of his brother's death possible, highlighting the fragile intersection between duty and human error. Yet, there is something profoundly human in the way these men navigated their impossible circumstances. Despite confusion, danger, and the constant threat of death, they relied on discipline, trust, and resilience. They adapted, improvised, and carried on, even when the rules of engagement and the clarity of intelligence failed them. In the end, the story of the codes, the signals, and the chaos is not just a tale of procedural mistakes. It is a story about how individuals cope with uncertainty, how they make impossible choices, and how, in the shadow of war, even the most careful plans can be undone by circumstance, chance, and tragedy. The moment a single shot leaves a torpedo tube, everything changes. In the confined space of a U-boat, the tension is palpable, almost physical. The crew holds its collective breath, trusting the calculations, the aim, and the captain's judgment, unaware that in a single instant, lives on another ship could be forever altered. For our captain, this was not just another routine attack. It became the pivotal moment where duty, fate, and personal tragedy collided. A single decision, executed under the strictest discipline, had the power to reshape lives. An invisible line drawn across the waves that no one could undo. The torpedo moves silently through the water, and in the quiet, one can almost sense the suspense, the uncertainty, the invisible hand of destiny guiding events that will leave permanent marks on history. When that torpedo struck its target, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. Ships that had been mere silhouettes on radar became scenes of chaos and devastation in an instant. Men scrambled for safety. Alarms blared, and the cold, relentless sea swallowed both ship and crew with indifferent speed. For the captain, the moments immediately following the impact were filled with the same mix of adrenaline and fear he had felt countless times before. Yet this time, there was an unfamiliar weight pressing on him. One that had nothing to do with strategy or enemy retaliation. The realization slowly settled in that the vessel he had targeted, the crew he had aimed to disrupt, carried not strangers but his own brother. In that instant, the mission ceased to be a matter of orders and tactics. It became profoundly personal. The precise mechanics of warfare, calculations, coordinates, timing, all became irrelevant in the face of the human cost. The captain was left with a visceral, unshakable awareness of the life that had been extinguished by his own hand. War often forces individuals to reconcile the necessity of action with the inevitability of loss. But no training or discipline could prepare anyone for the grief of knowing that a loved one had been caught in the crossfire. This single shot, meant to serve a strategic purpose, instead became a permanent emblem of tragedy. A moment that would haunt him long after the war ended. The aftermath of that torpedo strike extended beyond grief. It raised profound questions about responsibility, morality, and the nature of duty in wartime. The captain had acted within the parameters of his orders, following procedures that every competent officer was expected to uphold. Yet the rigid structures of military protocol could not shield him from the moral weight of his actions. In war, success is often measured by damage inflicted or objectives achieved. But the human cost rarely fits neatly into those calculations. The lines between right and wrong blur when a single decision can simultaneously be tactically correct and personally devastating. It is in these moments that the paradox of war becomes painfully clear. The very actions that are necessary to survive and succeed can also lead to the deepest suffering imaginable. This tragedy also highlights the unforgiving nature of chance in combat. A split-second error, an overlooked detail, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time can alter the course of countless lives. The captain's story is a stark reminder that even the most disciplined, skilled, and conscientious soldiers are not immune to the randomness of fate. History often records victories, losses, and statistics, but the individual experiences, the moral dilemmas, the unintended consequences, the heartbreak, are rarely captured with the same intensity. For this captain, the statistics of war became intimately personal, transforming abstract numbers into the unbearable reality of a brother lost. And yet, amid this heartbreak, there is a subtle, difficult kind of resilience. The captain, like many who face impossible choices in war, had to continue functioning, to navigate missions, to ensure the survival of his remaining crew. He had to live with the knowledge that his actions had consequences beyond strategy, that every decision carried a moral dimension that could not be erased. This resilience is not about forgetting or absolving. It is about bearing the weight of tragedy while continuing to act in a world defined by uncertainty and danger. The story of a single shot, therefore, is not only one of loss but also of the human capacity to endure, to reconcile duty with conscience, and to carry forward even when the cost is almost unimaginable. In the end, that single torpedo became more than just a weapon. It became a symbol of the complexity of war itself. It shows how the smallest actions can ripple outward with consequences that are both strategic and profoundly personal. It serves as a reminder that every mission, every order, and every decision carries with it the possibility of unintended consequences, sometimes the most tragic ones imaginable. The sea, the codes, the blackouts, and the calculations all converge in that one moment, leaving a permanent imprint on history, on the captain, and on the family he could never forget.